Good morning. Just going to wait to see if people will be joining us today for today's broadcast. I'm Randall Davis from Randall's ESL Cyber Listening Lab, and we'll start here in a minute or so. So just waiting to see who might be joining us. Good morning. Yes, son, good morning. Remind me, where are you connecting from? It's always good to see people joining us from different parts of the world. In today's broadcast, feel free to share your comments throughout the broadcast. Again, we're just going to wait a minute or so before we start. I'd like to welcome you all. Norb, hi, how are you? Where are you from? Colombia. Good to see you from Colombia. I know you've joined some of our broadcasts before. Brazil. What part of Brazil are you from? Please shout out even your cities, what part you're from. Well, it's great to see people joining us this morning for today's broadcast. We're going to start here in a minute, and just great to have so many people joining or engaging, whether live or later on. Well, let me go ahead and begin. Let me begin with a few just general comments, and I'd like to review some of the things that came out of last week's broadcast. Sao Paulo, great. Happy to hear that. So let me go ahead and just get into some initial comments. I'd like to review some comments from the last episode, and that was with Elaine last week. We were talking about how to develop an online teaching practice, and then we'll get into today's broadcast as well. We have some others. Outstanding coach. Well, we tried to do the best we can. Lika from Georgia. Great. Mario from Colombia. That's right. Antonio from Dominican Republic. Well, it's great to see all of you here this morning. Let's go ahead and begin today's presentation. And before I do that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to review some comments from the last episode, and then we'll get into today's episode, which is talking about vocabulary development. So last week, and before I forget, on Sunday, if any of you are teachers and you would like to participate in my teacher swap shop, that is on Sunday, this coming Sunday at 9 a.m. Teachers will be able to join through Zoom, sharing a 5-minute tip, question, comment about language learning, about their own teaching. And if you're interested, you have to contact me beforehand. I can provide the Zoom code and password. Please take a look at my Facebook page because I have more information regarding that. This, again, Sunday for a swap shop. Now, some of you might say, well, Randa, I'm not a teacher. I'm a language learner. And I'm hoping to have other Zoom meetings that would be inclusive and include everyone to different degrees and based on their interest. All right. We have a student from Vietnam, great, or teacher, and Carlos is joining from Costa Rica. Well, welcome. So let me go ahead and before we jump into today's presentation, what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of review some comments that came out of last week's broadcast. That was with Elaine Oliveira from Brazil. We were talking about how to develop an online teaching practice. And some of the comments that came up, number one, there was a comment from Ruben, and he says, do you have to make your whole curriculum and materials from scratch? In other words, teachers who are creating materials or adopting materials or adapting materials. What can they do? Because sometimes, Randall, I have to balance technology and curriculum. And how do I go about doing that? And certainly there are many ways on doing that. I'd like to just share one example. This actually comes from my website. And keeping in mind, you could use a variety of materials that are out there. I'm not simply suggesting that mine is the only way. But what I've done is I've tried to create a website that allows teachers right here to use the materials in class or online, and so forth. So in my website, I have pre-listening activities. I would look for websites that perhaps have pre-listening activities that you can use. I have included an idiom section. And of course, before you do any type of listening activity, you want to try to build, let's say, a scaffolding of materials, then go on to the actual listening activity. And I suggest when students or teachers are using different websites that have listening material, don't just click on the audio button right away. I suggest looking at the questions beforehand, reading through those. And the nice thing is that you can, even with Zoom or other technologies, the audio that's playing on your computer can actually be played in Zoom as well. So if you click on the audio button, for example, on my website using Zoom, students can actually listen to the audio. After the listening materials, I have vocabulary practice, post-listening activities, and then some type of online discussion. So with Ruben, the question is, and the idea is, how do I go about finding materials? Do I have to build everything from scratch? And fortunately, there are a number of websites out there, a lot of websites that you could use as part of your materials, either to adapt, adopt, or creating something new. So feel free during the broadcast today to share any of your resources. Again, Ruben had an excellent question. What other websites are out there or available that I could use as part of my teaching online? Another question that came up was Rola. She says, hi, everyone. I just want to ask, how do you handle online class with 20 students or more, 10 to 20 students? Any tips? Well, I found with doing Zoom classes, the last thing you want to do is get a class together of 10 or 20 students and then tell them the activity on that particular day. Sometimes the stress of participating in any class, and then you add to the layer of an online class, just increases the stress, the tension. So with online classes that are between 10, 20, 30, and so forth, two things I suggest. If you're using like a platform like Zoom, you would consider using a feature called breakout rooms. And we mentioned last week, and I think it was Fernanda mentioned that, hey, those breakout rooms are not just for the paid version, but they are for the free version of Zoom. And I'm sure there are other platforms that have that type of idea. The next idea I would suggest is give students, these 10 or 20 students beforehand, a task. So you tell the students before you meet the next time, you have 10 or 20 students, let them know exactly what you're going to be doing. If you have a situation that you're practicing for speaking, give them a heads up, give them a prompt, give them an idea of what is coming up so they can feel more confident and ready to go. And that was what I might suggest as well. Danny from last week says, what kinds of interest topics should I work on to start teaching basic English so it doesn't sound so boring? Like, what is your name? How are you today? And that's absolutely true. I think coming up with interesting topics is important. But even some of the most basic ideas of, hi, how are you today? You know, you remember when you first started studying English and you open up your book and it says, hi, how are you today? And the answer is always, fine, thank you. Well, what might be of interest to students is finding out what other expressions or possibilities are there, like, I'm terrible, or awesome, or I'm feeling under the weather. So giving them additional expressions beyond, hi, I'm fine, thank you, might make your class much more interesting. Other topics might be, for example, entertainment, topics about relationships. And I'm not talking about love relationships. It could be with roommates, with family, meeting people, and so forth. So I think that's a really good topic. Again, hi, I'm Randall from Randall's ESO Cyber Listening Lab, and we're just reviewing some comments that came up from last broadcast with Elaine Oliveira on establishing an online teaching practice. Let's see here. One last comment I'd like to share from last week. This was from Rita, and she says, if teachers are not computer savvy, how can they handle new teaching tools as a private tutor? And one of the things that I would suggest is don't try a new technology on a brand new class. You always want to try to experiment with things under real conditions, perhaps with a colleague, with a friend, because you want to make sure that you look very, very confident in your recording. The last couple of comments I'd like to share, and I see some comments coming in as well. Last week, we were talking about different technologies and tools. I know Elaine and I mentioned this particular webcam that was in the show notes, a really clear quality webcam if you're doing online teaching, or even as a student if you're wanting the video quality to come out well. I also mentioned that I use the Blue Yeti. It is a USB microphone. It's a really nice one. And sometimes when you're speaking, sometimes you hear these aspirated pops and sounds like pop, pop, and sometimes that becomes a little bit annoying. So sometimes people might use a commercial pop screen to catch those small aspirated sounds. And but if you don't want to spend like $20 on something like that, I've got an embroidery hoop, and I've just taken some old pantyhose, and this actually will catch the sound and make the quality a little bit better as well. So those are just some thoughts from the last broadcast. Let's see who else is here today. Danny says, thanks for the tips. I'm happy to hear that. Thanks for your comment. Another one, Isra says, I'm from UAE. I think that breakout room is very useful, makes discussions between groups, and it creates competition. Absolutely. So practicing with breakout groups. Again, Rita mentioned, how do you get used to new technologies? And breakout rooms requires a few settings. You have to make sure that you make adjustments to make sure those things work well. Elmer says, hello, Randall. Thank you. Good to hear you. Rita says, Blue Yeti is super expensive here. So if that is the case where, wow, the Blue Yeti has a really nice voice and so forth, quality, but really expensive, it could be an option. Another thing I use is what's called the Purple Panda. That's a nice lavalier mic that you can put on your shirt. Really nice quality. And I like that, especially when I'm creating videos with my phone, plug it into my phone. It's a cheaper option. But thanks, Rita, for mentioning. I want to be careful of recommending things that, could be expensive, and that's important. We have someone from Japan. Welcome. Greetings from Diego from Bogota. Happy to hear and see all of you today. So those are just some general comments from the last broadcast. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to get into today's episode, which is Riding the Big Bang to Confident Vocabulary Development. And as part of this presentation, and let me go ahead and bring up the presentation that I'll be sharing, is one of the things, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, where you wake up in the morning and you have this idea percolating in your mind. It won't let go. It's like a cat that wants to be released. And one of the things that I thought about for a very long time is about vocabulary development and how this is connected to language learning, how this is connected to listening and speaking, how this is connecting to, everything we do, including writing. And so one of the things I'd like to share with you today regarding vocabulary development, and again, the purpose of the presentation today is number one, is to develop some general concepts of vocabulary development, not only for high resource environments, that is where you have all of the technologies available, but also for low resource environments as well, where you don't have technology or there is no internet, because certainly those places exist. And I want to talk just briefly a little bit about how to pave the way for a future discussion on actual tools, apps, websites, online services, and other resources that could be used for vocabulary development. So that, I think, would be a great presentation that I'm hoping to come up with in the future. Again, I'm Randall from Randall's ESL Cyber Listening Lab, and again, providing you tips with language learning and culture and human development. So during today's presentation, again, focusing on general concepts of vocabulary development. And again, feel free to share any tools, any resources that you have. But here are some questions for you that I'd like to hear about. Number one, what is the relationship between vocabulary, speaking, writing? We could put in grammar as well there. Number two, what are the best ways to build your vocabulary as a student and also helping your students develop their vocabulary? And what tips, websites, tools, dictionaries, online resources are available to increase your students' word power or your word power as a student? And again, as I mentioned, general concepts today, and that will lead into another presentation on actual websites and resources. But I think I wanted to start with some general concepts. So feel free during the presentation today to share any of these ideas that I mentioned here, these questions about vocabulary development. All right. So what I wanted to, before I actually talk about that, I want to talk about choosing your words. Choosing your words. And what do you mean by choosing your words? There was once when I went out to the bus stop, I was waiting for the bus and a student came up to me and said, matriculate, matriculate. Randall, I know a new word. It's called matriculate. And again, I think in Portuguese and in Spanish, you have a very similar word. So what I asked the student, what does this word mean? And how do you use it? And the student said, well, matriculate. I matriculate into the university. But I found that the student was, rather than choosing words that, well, I mean, again, matriculate could be a very useful word, but this student was kind of choosing words out of the air, like epistemology and suture. And I mean, these words that were low frequency words, but there was no kind of structure, no way to organize these words. He was just choosing a word here and a word there. So I often encourage students, rather than choosing random words, choose words by topic. For example, I'm going to be focusing on words that are dealing, let's be very simple here. The classroom, starting at a very basic level, like with nouns, pencil, desk, eraser, and then verbs, study, review, take. And that could be anything. It could be vocabulary in a doctor's office. It could be vocabulary on job, workplace vocabulary. So often, instead of just choosing these wild, random words that have really no connection to daily use. And again, most of us, I think, are thinking about daily use, words that we can use again and again. I often suggest students choose words that you can use readily and quickly. So choosing words and lists. And you might actually know of a website or a book or a teaching tip that can help with these type of ideas. Again, the idea of selecting words based on word lists and topics. A couple of ideas. Again, we have Danny says, hey, there are tons of materials and tools. For example, I love ingvid.com. They teach all levels of English with native teachers. Well, great. I'm assuming that is an example of curriculum or materials that teachers could adopt or adapt to their classrooms. Very useful. Again, we have another Deanna from Jordan. So again, the first idea in dealing with the topic of vocabulary development is choose words that you can readily use. The next idea that I would like to share is dealing with building your building word wheels. Now, what is that? What does that mean? And how does that work? Well, let me just show you what I mean by word wheels. Let me just get over to the screen right here. Okay, so imagine, for example, that you're looking at the word sleep. And the word sleep is not a level 29 word. Right? Sleep, often students think of it generally as a verb, right? I like, she sleeps a lot, the baby sleeps a lot, the dog is sleeping. And so often students, when they find a new word, I know the word, I check it off to the next word. But I found that something, and again, as I'm talking about the idea of the Big Bang of vocabulary development, and the idea of the word wheel, rather than just choosing a word like sleep and then moving on, it's often very useful to devise a word wheel. And again, this doesn't require any technology at all. It requires a piece of paper, maybe on your computer or something. So, for example, first of all, when you think of the word sleep, we think of it as a verb. And I think most students, when they're learning English, are thinking of the verb sleep, the word sleep as a verb, but also it can be used as a noun, and it can also be used as an adjective. So often when students think about verbs, they think of this. What about sleep? Sleep on something. Now, as we go, and what I want to do is I want to share with you, let's go back actually to that screen, because I think that's a useful, and I can show you how to develop these words. Just with the verb sleep, you have sleep on something. That means to think about, sleep before you make a careful decision. Sleep in, that means to sleep later than usual. Like, I'm going to sleep in this morning. I don't have to go to school. Sleep over, that means to stay at someone's house. Like, I'm going to sleep over at my friend's house. They have a party tonight. Sleep off, that means to, for example, someone has a hangover and they've been drinking too much, and now they have to sleep off to get rid of the effects of the hangover. Boy, you need to sleep off, your hangover. Sleep around, right? Means to have a number of sexual partners. Sleep your day away. So when you look at all of these, just with the one word sleep, you have all of these collocations, all of these connections to just the simple word of sleep. Now, also, when you think about nouns, well, what about nouns? Well, you need sleep. I need sleep. All right. I've been working so hard. Lose sleep over. No, don't lose sleep over that job, or don't lose sleep over your broken relationship. Right? That means to worry too much about, or rub sleep from your eyes. Oh, I'm getting up early and I need to rub the sleep from my eyes. So again, you have the same word sleep, but now you have it as a noun. Well, what about adjectives with the word sleep? Well, to be sleepy. I'm really sleepy, but you can have a sleepy town. That means quiet. That's a very sleepy town, a very quiet town. So the idea of building word wheels, again, starting with one single word, and again, bang, like the Big Bang, you can come up with so many possible combinations, and you could do this with a pencil. Now, one thing some people might ask is, where do you come up with some ideas for, developing word wheels? And let me share with you today. I'm going to share with you one website, very popular website. And again, when I recommend any particular website, I don't want to recommend a website that is here today and gone tomorrow. And often when students they think about the Merriam-Webster Collegiate Dictionary for university students. But one of my favorites is the Learner's Dictionary, the Merriam-Webster Learner's Dictionary. And the nice thing about this dictionary is that it gives words, but the definition and the sample sentences are not level 29. So for example, you look sleep. I couldn't sleep last night. I usually try to sleep for at least 8 hours. I slept badly. We were sleeping peacefully. So the sample sentences are excellent. Then you go down. Right? The temp sleeps 5 adults. That means have enough space for. So we're talking about accommodating people, not someone actually sleeping. And again, it continues to get right to the let sleeping dogs lie, gives an example of so many. So the nice thing about this particular website, and again, it's the Learner's Dictionary, is that it gives so many possible examples where you can build that word wheel. Let's look at maybe some of the other comments that we have here. Here's a one. Isra says, gallery walk is a useful way to teach vocabulary by moving around to find suitable meaning of the words. You know, I would be interested in hearing a little bit more about the gallery walk and how that works. I'm unfamiliar with that, and I'd be happy to, maybe you could share a little bit more comments about that. Danny says, it makes sense to work on vocabulary by topics and situations. Okay. Yeah. And the idea is rather than choosing random words, students can feel like they're building upon ideas. Rita says, vocabulary is the backbone of grammar. Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, for example, when we think about words, we're not thinking of just about what they mean, but how you say them, pronunciation, like sleep, slept, the past tense, right? She's been sleeping, or present perfect tense. She slept. And again, you have that connection between the grammar and pronunciation. Absolutely. Writing requires a good foundation of grammar and proper usage. Okay. Another, phrasal verbs, great examples. Yes, those phrasal verbs are those combinations. And again, not just with sleep, but with many examples. Thank you, Rita. The word wheel is brilliant. Thank you. And I wish I could say that was my own idea, but I've seen that used many different ways. And word wheels can be used in different ways. I mean, when I think about word wheels, I also think about this, for example, if you're thinking about bodies of water and you have a word wheel, and often people think about ocean, okay, ocean, and then lake, and then pond, and then puddle. And again, you can create different types of word wheels. Let's say river, like you're talking about flowing water. Well, you have a river, then you have a stream, and then you have a creek. So there's many ways of creating these types of word wheels. All right. So the next idea is a little bit different. And this is, okay, so you've selected a group of words. You've decided on creating word wheels on particular topics. Again, sleep. Just imagine with just one word of sleep, you have so many combinations. The next thing is having a conversation with a roommate in your brain. Now, what do you mean by that, Randall? Well, I think every one of us, a lot of times people say, oh, Randall, no, we just need to start using the words in writing and in speaking. But I think there is an intermediary step, and that is having conversations with a roommate in your brain. Now, Randall, what do you mean? Well, one of the things that I really enjoy doing is running long distance in the mountains. I'm not very good. I'm very slow. I've been in races where I'm running all night in the mountains. Who knows? There might be a black bear 50 feet from me and I don't even know it. But often I have conversations with a roommate in my brain. Sometimes the roommate in my brain says, good job, Randall, keep going, yeah. And other times the roommate is more like a squatter, an unwelcome roommate. Give up, yeah, take a break, you can't do it. And I know that many of us have this unwanted roommate in our brain that we have ongoing conversations with, right? Trying to convince us to do certain things, encouraging us to try new things. And that's that unwanted roommate. But there are many times when this roommate in your brain, that inner self, can be really useful. In other words, there can be times where, going back to the idea of sleep, that a student, before they have opportunities to write, before students have an opportunity to practice in speaking, or perhaps they don't have any opportunities at all, they can have conversations in their mind with that roommate in their brain, practicing sentences like, yesterday I didn't get much sleep. Oh, there's that noun. And I feel very sleepy. That is the adjective. And I guess I'm going to decide to sleep in today. And and just you go on, right? Sleep through. Oh, yeah. And, yesterday I had a problem at work and I was so tired that I slept through the meeting. So having these online, ongoing conversations with the roommate in your brain can be a really, really useful way to say, okay, I have these ideas. I'm not really sure what to do yet, but actually it can give you that practice that you can begin with. My accent is cute. Well, I certainly try. I think anytime that people participate in any types of conversation, they feel nervous, and so do I, but I think it's great. I usually teach words, thank you, Misa, by asking students to think about synonyms and antonyms for target words. Absolutely. I mean, when you think even with the word sleep or tired, like tired, exhausted, and so forth. So absolutely, that is a great idea to do that. Omar says, your listening activity about bank robbery was the best. I have an activity on my website that deals with that. And I think what I've tried to do, even with my website, is try to have activities where students can practice conversations, that they can use the different comments and ideas in that. The last idea that I'd like to share, actually, Israel says, gallery walk, we can use it after teaching the vocabulary. You have to be sure that the students recognize and find the meaning by sticking the meanings randomly in the corners of the room and letting them find the meanings for the same word they have. Excellent idea. So these are great tools and ideas. And again, feel free to be sharing any ideas that you might have as part of, exploring vocabulary. The last idea that I would like to share today deals with that next step. So we've talked about choosing your words. We talked about building word wheels. And again, these don't require much technology. Again, you could be using a dictionary. Next idea is having conversations with a roommate in your brain, formulating ideas in your brain before you actually using them, testing those ideas out. And the last idea would be, making that next step of using words in writing and speaking. Now, I know that many teachers today and many students today, finding themselves in difficult situations with the pandemic, don't have this opportunity. Well, Randall, I'm staying at home a lot of the times. My opportunities to speak with native speakers or just my teachers or anyone is limited. And that's where I would suggest, and this is something I mentioned last week, the idea of creating Zoom rooms or using any other technology where you can get together with other people. Now, you might say, Randall, I don't know any other people. Or I'm a teacher and I'm not sure how to connect with other classes and other teachers. One of the nice things about Zoom is that teachers, you don't have to be a teacher to create a Zoom room. A group of students can create Zoom rooms. They can, meet together, practice vocabulary, practice speaking, doing different activities. So certainly there can be limitations, but the idea of going back to choosing your words, building word wheels, having conversations, and then putting ideas into practice. Certainly, I would be more interested. I know that some of you have shared some ideas on how to develop vocabulary. So they have the vocabulary. What do you do next with it? I'm certainly interested in those ideas as well. Omar says, teaching vocabulary can be sorted out, but how about getting students to remember and using them in the long run? Oh, this is an excellent idea. And one of the things that, and let me kind of close my ideas today, but again, feel free to share any last comment that you have about ideas, is Omar, and let me bring up your comment up here again, is that how to keep them solidified in the brain. Is one of the things that I've tried to do in some of my classes. Sometimes teachers teach a particular unit, and once they finish that unit, let's say it's on entertainment or shopping or whatever, they go on to the next unit. And it's kind of like, whoo, that topic's over and now let's move on. But one of the probably the most important things, and again, Omar, I'm glad you've brought this up, is the idea of constantly recycling, or I call it cross-pollinating, like little bees that are flying from flower to flower, of kind of recycling things around. And I found that when I have in my own classes taken the vocabulary they studied in chapter 1, and then we cross-pollinate it. We show threaded connections between the new vocabulary that has a tendency, at least in my experience, to have that vocabulary stick. And that is, I think, a really important idea. So let me go ahead and close out. Again, I want to thank you for joining this presentation. This was something I just thought about yesterday. I was thinking about listening and speaking and then technologies and so forth. And then this idea of vocabulary development kind of percolated to the surface. I started thinking about that. One of the things that I mentioned earlier, going back to the earlier slide that I showed you, was right here. We've talked about the word wheel. Again, these were some of the questions that I talked about. Is one of the things that I would like to do is, although we talked just about general ideas of vocabulary development, one of the things that I want to do next is actually move on to actually talking about teaching tools, websites, applications, any of those things that, okay, Randall, the ideas that you talked about today are great for high resource. That means classes that have lots of technology. And the ideas that you mentioned about selecting vocabulary and word wheels can be used for low resource environments. But the next one of the presentations I would like to do in the future is, okay, we've talked about these fundamental ideas. What is next? And so what we're going to be addressing in a future broadcast is just that. And if you're interested by chance, if you're interested in, hey, Randall, I would be interested as a teacher in participating, sharing some ideas on vocabulary development, please let me know. The last thing is again, on Sunday, I'll be having that teacher swap swap shop. You can find more information on my website. Basically, the idea is to allow teachers to come into a private Zoom room and for about 5 minutes share a question, a concern, a teaching tip on whatever you'd like. Again, please take a look at my Facebook. I have more information on that and how to participate. A couple of last things. Yes, I'm connecting for, let's see if we have any last comments here. Thank you so much. No problem. Danny says, that's amazing. I've been following you since I was 20 years old. And that's been 14 years ago. And, you know, one of the things I never really knew how long this website would be developed, that I would continue to develop it. But just like you as teachers and as language learners, you hope that you're constantly being open to new ideas. Another one, Isra says, there is a word wall app. Very nice application to teach vocabulary by using games like wheels, sorting words, and flashcards. And Isra, feel free to share that in the show notes, in the notes at the very end. I know many words, but I get stuck when speaking and writing. How can I learn vocabulary more effectively? By myself. And that's one of the things I think that can be a challenge. And one of the things that I found is that finding ways, especially how to use the words. I mean, I know a word, but I can't use it. And again, one of the ideas I shared a little bit earlier was, again, the Online Learner's Dictionary by Webster can at least give some examples of how these words can be used in different sentences. Again, I want to thank you for joining today's broadcast on Riding the Big Bang to Confident Vocabulary Development. Feel free to share any other comments you have right after the broadcast. I'd be happy to answer. Also, please share any, again, websites, apps, and so forth that could help us lead to a new discussion on different technologies for language learners. Again, thank you very much for joining today. Again, if you have any other questions or suggestions, feel free to contact me through Facebook. Until the next time, again, Randall from Randall's ESL Cyber Listening Lab. See you next time.